Okay, on 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, I'm Covert Bailey. You've probably seen me on television a lot lately. I have my own PBS show, and you know that I talk about fitness most of the time. My show called Fit or Fat. I talk about your health. I want people to be healthy, and I put out a lot in those programs. Well, I got something new for you today, because I also think the health of a nation is something that's worth talking about. I have a friend named Harry Browne. He's running for president. He's got fresh ideas, and I don't care if you're a staunch Democrat or a staunch Republican. Sometimes you get sick with the people in your own party, don't you, right? How about some fresh new ideas? I'm going to have a talk with Harry Browne. Let's do it. Harry, you made some pretty wild claims sometimes, but one of the ones that really intrigues me is the name of your new book, Government Doesn't Work. In fact, it's called Why Government Doesn't. Tell me, why doesn't government work? What did you mean by that?
Well, government doesn't work. It doesn't deliver the mail on time. It doesn't educate our children properly. It doesn't keep the cities safe. Everything it touches and everything it promises seems to turn to dust. And the reason is that government is force. And when you try to force people to do things, they never do exactly what you intended for them to do. They always begin to look for ways to get around it. So what we have to do is to rely on force as little as possible. Get the government out of everything that we can and rely on us to take care of our own lives.
Now, did I hear the word right? Force? You're saying the government relies on force.
Sure.
What do you mean by
The only
that?
reason you pass a law is to force people to do what they don't want to do, or force them to pay for something they don't want to pay for, or forcibly prevent them from doing what they do want to do. And any businessman can tell you that you don't get anywhere trying to intimidate your employees. You have to motivate them to want what you want. And the problem is that government is force, and so force doesn't work, and so government programs don't work. Its war on poverty has escalated poverty many times over. Its war on drugs has increased drug use and increased crime in America rather than the opposite, which was what was promised.
Yeah, I noticed that myself a lot. I see the war on drugs, and the drug problem gets worse and worse and worse, and so you have a bigger war on drugs, and I think something's wrong with the system there.
Right, and the answer is not to reform the federal government, not to find somebody better able to manage big government, but to reduce it to the absolute minimum possible. And that's what my program is all about. I'm saying to the American people, would you give up your favorite federal programs if it meant you never had to pay income tax again? Because that's the cost of those programs. It isn't the 20 cents a day or $3 a month or $20 a year that the politicians like to say when they want to trivialize your farm subsidy or student loan or the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, whatever it is. You can't have your program unless everybody else gets his, and that adds up to $1 trillion a year in income taxes and Social Security taxes that have to pay for those. So if we could just get the federal government to back down to the limits of the Constitution, then we wouldn't need an income tax. We could finance national defense and the judiciary and the other functions of government that the Constitution authorizes with just the revenues already being collected from tariffs and excise taxes. So it comes down to every dollar you earn would be yours to spend, to save, to give away as you see fit, not as the politicians decide.
I would imagine that at this point...
Pause on that. I think you may want to come in and have a look at that.
Okay.
Stand by for us to disconnect you from
Yeah,
the
that's right.
And on 5, 4, 3,
Thanks for the opportunity.
2.
Hi, I'm Covert Bailey. I'm sure you see my face a lot on public television.
Let's try one more time. On 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, I'm Covert Bailey. I'm sure you've seen my face a lot on public television, and usually I talk about being fit or fat, right? I'm interested in people's health, and I pour out a lot of myself on those shows, whether you know it or not. I care about your health. I also care about the nation's health, and so I'm going to do something weird and different today. I think that my friend Harry Browne, who is now running for president, should be heard. I don't care if you're a staunch Democrat or a staunch Republican. I'm sure you get sick and tired of your elected officials sometimes, don't you? It's time to hear something fresh and something new. Let's have a talk with Harry Browne. Harry, I love your book, Why Government Doesn't Work. But what did you really mean? What do you mean when you say government doesn't work?
Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't deliver the mail on time. It doesn't educate our children properly. It doesn't keep the cities safe. Everything it promises turns to dust. And what we need is not to reform government, not to find somebody better able to manage big government, but to reduce it to the absolute minimum possible.
So if I hear you right, you're taking a little bit of shot at both our prominent candidates right now. That what they want to do is just reform what we've already got.
Oh, of course. They all think that they can manage big government better. But the fact is that government doesn't work. Its war on drugs has escalated drug use and crime in America. Its war on poverty has increased poverty many times over. And we have to get the federal government out of all of these areas that it's moved into over the last 30 to 60 years and made such a mess of.
So it's not so much what the government's into, but if I hear you right, you're attacking size, just the size of government, really.
Absolutely. It doesn't work, and we have to get it out of our lives if we can to make it as irrelevant as possible. And if we do that, then we don't need a federal income tax, because the income tax is only necessary to finance a welfare state. And if we're willing to do without that, then we can do without the income tax. So it really comes down to this. Would you give up your favorite federal programs, whatever they are, farm subsidy, student loan, maybe you love the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, whatever it is, would you give up your favorite federal programs if it meant you never had to pay income tax again?
I'm afraid of the person who says, I don't have a favorite federal program.
And there are a lot of those.
I'm sure you're right. Okay, let's see if I've got that right. What you're suggesting is that it's possible we might have no income tax at all, but you're saying that people give up something favored in order to get that.
Yes, give up a favorite federal program. Or if you don't have any favorite federal program, then you're just a net winner all the way around. But the point is that the government has moved into all these areas: welfare, education, housing, transportation. The federal government shouldn't even be involved in crime control or regulation or healthcare or agriculture, because it has made a mess of every one of these areas. Let's take welfare, for instance.
Okay.
You know, I'm 63 years old. When I grew up, we didn't even use the word welfare, because welfare was some kind of little department in the back of City Hall. Charity was taken care of by churches and service clubs and agencies like the United Way, who cared about getting people off the dole and back into productive life again. Then the war on poverty came in the 1960s, and we built this giant bureaucratic empire whose only interest is in keeping people in poverty. And as a result, we have millions of Americans now who live in hopelessness and despair because they believe they will never be able to hold a job, never be able to support themselves, never be able to take care of their families on their own. They're completely dependent upon the government. We have to put a stop to that.
Actually, you even had a comment the other day about immigration and how it relates to the war on poverty. I can't remember what you said about that.
Well, it's a typical example of how government creates problems and then comes to the rescue like the cavalry, that it's going to solve it. The reason we have immigration problems is because of this welfare state. We have a welcome wagon on the border saying, come to America, we'll give you free education, free health care, free welfare, free anything you want. And so, of course, the worst elements of the world come here looking to get on the gravy train. No matter who's elected president, the borders aren't going to be closed down. They're open now. Illegal, legal immigration comes running across the borders, and nobody can stop that. But what we can stop is the welfare state, so that we no longer invite these people to come over and get on the gravy train. Government doesn't work, and we are not going to solve problems created by government, by putting more police on the borders, by building a ditch, by having identity cards, and all of these things that the politicians propose. Let's get government out of the picture, and then let's see some improvement.
Good point. Good point. Well, folks, fresh ideas, fresh ideas. This is an old friend of mine. I've been listening to his financial advice for a long, long time. But Harry Browne has got new things and new ideas. If you're a staunch Republican or a staunch Democrat, I think you ought to open your ears and open your brain and say, I'm willing to listen to something new. Harry Browne needs to be listened to. He's got some interesting things to say, for example, about the war on drugs. That's for you, Harry. How are you going to handle that question?
Well, I'm sick of seeing our children being preyed upon by drug dealers on campuses. I'm sick of seeing muggers on the streets trying to support a $100 a day habit. I'm sick of gangs fighting over monopoly territory and drug profits. But you know, we never had any of these things in America until the war on drugs started in the early 1960s. The only The only comparable period we had to this before the war on drugs started was alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. The same thing, gangs fighting over territories.
That's true. They made a mess out of everything.
Right. Innocent people being shot in drive-by shootings, people dying of overdoses because they were drinking bathtub gin, muggers on the streets. All of these things happened during the 1920s, and it all ended in 1933 when prohibition was repealed. And then the crime rate just dropped steadily year by year by year, every year until the early 1960s, and then the war on drugs started and it was prohibition all over again. If we care anything about our civilization, about our cities, if we care anything about our children, we have to end this insane war on drugs.
Interesting. It's like making a crime out of something that's not a crime.
That's true.
The government wants to say this is a crime. They made alcohol a crime. And people said, I don't care if you did, we are not going to live without alcohol.
Right.
It doesn't make any difference whether you're a drinker or a non-drinker. They made it illegal and that spawned crime.
And these problems can create problems for the people who partake of them. But when you make them illegal, then they become everybody's problem, and we're hurt by them as well as the people who are abusing their own lives. But the politicians only know one answer to anything, and that is more government. Let's have tougher sentences, more police on the street, let's have tougher sentences, more police on the street.
It's okay. It's okay. Tougher sentences, more police on the street.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Let's have tougher sentences, more police on the street, more invasions of our civil liberties, more government, more higher taxes. All of these things are the only answers politicians know. But in this area, as with so many other areas, we could do so much more by pulling government back, by giving people responsibility for their own lives.
But now, don't you think that both Dole and Clinton want to cut back on government? That's what they always talk about.
Well, it's an election year, and they know that the American people are sick to death of supporting a wasteful, extravagant government at the expense of their own families. So they're saying government's too big, the era of big government is over, we have to do this, we have to do that. But the fact is that they are lifetime politicians who have spent their entire careers making this big government that they now presume to be against. What we need are people who are more concerned about what they can accomplish in one term than they are about being reelected, that they will go there for one term to reduce government to the absolute minimum possible. And that's why I'm running for president, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life watching government get bigger and bigger, more oppressive, more expensive, year after year after year.
Okay, well now, are you saying that you would cut the size of the government more than Dole might or Clinton might?
Well, they're not proposing any cuts at all. They're only proposing to slow down the rate of increase. But if government is too big, and it is, then smaller government means government that's smaller than it is now. And I want to cut it to a fraction of its present size. I want to get the federal government out of all these areas that it's made such a mess of. Welfare, education, healthcare, agriculture, housing, transportation, crime control, regulation. The federal government should not be involved in any way whatsoever. The answer to welfare is not to block grant money back to the states, not to have 2 years and you're out, or workfare instead of welfare. The answer is to get the federal government out of it completely, so we go back to the kind of climate and country that we had before the war on poverty started.
Which, by the way, the Founding Fathers set up in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Most of these things that you're talking about were not allowed in the Constitution in the first place.
Right, and the Constitution is key to all of this, because if you do not limit the government, if you do not say, here is the line and you cannot cross it, then you have unlimited government. Then they can pass laws on anything they want. They can tax you as much as they want. They can spend as much as they want, because there is no built-in limit, and the limit has to be the Constitution. If the Constitution doesn't authorize enough, let's amend it. If it authorizes too much, then let's amend it. But let's not violate the Constitution and let the Supreme Court, the President, and the Congress, and all these people make up their own rules as they go along.
Yeah, they write their own Constitution. It's not right. It's not right at all. Do you have a size in your mind, or is that a realistic question? You say you want to cut the government in physical size, numbers of people employed. We're talking about cutting physically. Do you have something in your head about that?
Well, I don't really care how many people are employed, although it would certainly be a lot fewer than it is now, but I want to see the government involved in far fewer things than it is now. And I believe I have laid out in my book Why Government Doesn't Work, a budget whereby the government could operate on $100 billion a year. We would have a more effective national defense than we do now. We would have a better judiciary than we do now, but we would not be involved in any of these things that the government has stuck its nose into over the last 60 years.
Of course, the classic one is the Social Security issue. You know, how are we going to dig us out of that mess?
Oh, that is a very important issue, and of course it's one the politicians don't want to talk about.
Right. But I shouldn't have brought it up to embarrass you. You got a good answer?
Of course. If you are on Social Security today, I know how you feel. You're worried that the politicians are going to take your benefits away from you. You know, I know, and the politicians know that Social Security is going to explode in a few years, and what's going to happen to your benefits? If you're a young person putting money away, you know Social Security isn't going to last as long as you are, and so you figure this is all money just going down the drain. What are we going to do? We have to get the government out of Social Security. And how do we do that without leaving anybody holding the bag? Sell off all these assets that the government has acquired with our money. It owns tens of thousands of buildings, lands all over the western states, pipelines, power companies, unused military bases like the Presidio. All of these things, let's put them on the auction block, get the money for them, and then with the first proceeds that come in, buy lifetime annuities for the people who are dependent on Social Security today, so that they have guaranteed contracts that nobody can take away from them, and the rest of us will be free of that 15% Social Security tax forever. The only way we're going to solve the problem is to get the government out of it, because government doesn't work and it can't operate a retirement system any better than it can operate the post office.
Good point, good point. Well, another thing that always comes to mind is our schools, and I know you're hot on that too. You got a kid in school, do you worry about whether they're going to be able to pass the SATs? I know I worried about mine. And you have to remember that an awful large percentage of the decisions made about policy in public schools is coming right out of Washington. Well, if kids are doing worse and worse and worse on the scholastic aptitude tests, there are kids getting out of high school who can't read applications for a job. Wow, I think our schools are getting worse. Harry's got an answer for that.
Well, first off, we should have never let the federal government stick its nose under the tent. It has ruined our schools. The SAT score started dropping in the 1960s when the federal government first moved in. So we obviously have to get the federal government out of it. And that doesn't mean just closing the Department of Education and then spreading the functions around to other areas of the federal government, but getting the federal government completely out of education. But the most important thing we can do for education in America is to repeal the federal income tax.
Whoa, you're relating federal income tax repeal to improving the school system?
Absolutely.
This I got to hear.
Can you imagine, suppose you have children in schools today, and suppose you didn't have to pay income tax. You could have the resources then to put your child in any school you wanted, private, religious, secular. You could ask for a school that had prayer or no prayer, sex education or no sex education. Whatever kind of curriculum you thought was best, you could find a school that met that. No more arguing with your neighbors or the school board over curriculum. No more writing letters to Congress. You just simply take the resources that you've earned and use them to buy the education for your children you want. This will do more to improve education in America than any federal program or any state or local program.
Just the ability to withdraw your child and put them in any school you want forces the school to get better, because suddenly they have no students.
Of course, and this applies all the way across the board with anything, housing, healthcare, all of these areas. If we get the government out of it so it's not running up the price of things, and we have control over our own money, if every dollar you make is yours to spend, to save, to give away as you see fit, not as somebody in Washington thinks is best, then obviously you're going to get far more for your money, because you will spend it wisely. You will worry about what happens to it because you've got to earn the money to replace it. They don't have to earn the money that they spend, so obviously they don't care whether it works or doesn't work, as long as it satisfies their political friends. And you know, this brings us to an important point. Anytime you think to yourself, the government should do this, or we really ought to have the government do that, you are asking it to become a political decision. You are taking it out of the realm of science or finance or medicine or whatever it is and turning it over to politics and saying, now I'm going to have this decided by Bill Clinton and Bob Dole and Newt Gingrich and Teddy Kennedy, and all these people will get together and they'll negotiate some kind of a deal that will make it good for the politicians, that will reward their political backers, that will reward the people who have the most political influence, which is never you or me.
So get them out of it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Which is right back to the Constitution. I hate to keep harping on that.
Don't make political issues out of things that we should be deciding for ourselves.
On a local level. I totally agree. I totally agree. I've heard the number that we now have 51% of American people who are employed are working for the government. Is that number accurate?
No.
Not quite? No.
No.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Today, 48% of our, today, 48% of the national income is eaten up by federal, state, and local taxes. That means virtually half of everything you make goes to government at one level or another. Mm-hmm. That means if you and your spouse are both working, in effect, one of you is working for the government and the other one is working for your family. That's not right.
Yeah, or the other way of looking at that is if half of my pay almost, that means if I start work in January, I work January, February, March, half the year, and none of it comes to me.
Right.
And then the second half of the year, I work for me.
Right.
Doesn't seem right.
And in my program, the proposals that I'm making, we will reduce that the first year to 25%. That means that instead of half of what you earn being yours to control, 3/4 of it will be almost immediately, and that means you're getting about a 50% increase in the disposable income, the money that you can spend on what you need to take care of your family. And speaking of families, look what this does for family values. You'll be able to implement the values that you believe in, not the values that Bill Clinton or Bob Dole thinks are best for you. You'll be able to decide what to do with your money, how to raise your child, who's going to control the teaching of that child, and everything.
The family value issue is, for me, is the most laughable hoax that ever was. The politicians are claiming, oh, I believe in family values. And the very definition to me of family values means that we as a family decide what our values are.
Absolutely.
And what they do is say, we are going to help you with family values by telling you what they are. Well, they want to mandate family values. It's nuts.
It's like anything else. It's a political issue on which to campaign. It turned Bob Dole into a movie critic, and it's turned Bill Clinton into designing school uniforms. and really, what you really want is just to have your own money back so that you can take care of your children by the values that you believe in.
Okay. Now, you're saying we're going to cut the income tax down by 25%? Is that
No. We're going to get rid of the income tax entirely and replace it with nothing. No flat tax, no flat tax, no flat tax, no sales tax. We can finance national defense, the judiciary, and the other functions of government that the Constitution authorizes with just the revenues already being collected from tariffs and excise taxes. Tariffs are taxes that are imposed upon imports, and excise taxes are on cigarettes, alcohol, gasoline, a few other things that the federal government taxes. And the revenues we get now are sufficient for the constitutional functions of government. They're just not sufficient for a welfare state. And if we're willing to give up the welfare state, we can be free of the income tax forever. And that means the personal income tax, the corporate income tax, the estate tax, the gift tax, Social Security tax, capital gains tax, all direct taxes. You will never have any relationship with the IRS again.
In fact, abolish the IRS. It's gone. It's history.
Of course. Of course. It is the worst abomination that has ever been perpetrated on a free country. The idea that they can go rummaging through your bank account, looking for evidence with which to hang you. The idea that they can summon you into their offices and say, here, bring all of your records and prove to us that you have not been cheating. Prove to us that you really didn't earn any more money than you said and that you really did spend the money on expenses that you say. This is just totally incompatible with a free country.
Ooh. I wonder what the tax accountants will do if we get rid of the IRS.
Oh, they'll find gainful employment. You know, the interesting thing, people always say, but what about all those government employees and so on?
That is a good point.
I have never found a tax attorney who didn't say, I would give up the income tax in a moment, because they pay income tax too. I have never come across a government employee yet who didn't say, you think government doesn't work? You don't know the half of it. I'm on the inside. I can tell you horror stories that you've never dreamed of. These people would like to be free of the federal government, free of the income tax, like to be able to be employed in the private sector in much more productive jobs, much more secure jobs than they have in the government. And when we repeal the income tax, we're going to leave in the economy $1 trillion a year that's currently being sucked out in income and Social Security taxes. And that $1 trillion is going to buy a job for everyone who can work and charity for everyone who can't work.
Boy, I don't know about you. We talked about health in the country. We've got a new way to look at it, don't we? Let's come back in a second. That sentence will be cut out. He gave me the 5-minute warning. Now, see, to me, we're warmed up.
One, I'm Covert Bailey, and then turned to his own camera and went on from there. Whatever is thrown my way, and turning it into government doesn't work. It doesn't educate our children, you know, and so on.
And we have speed on 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, I'm Covert Bailey. You've seen me on public television a lot talking about being fit or being fat. Okay, one of the things that's different about me today is that I'm interviewing a gentleman here who's an old friend of mine, Harry Browne. He's running for president of the United States. And one of his issues is he says we need to cut the size of government. I have the feeling government's into everything. They tell us how to run our schools. Government tells me how to run my business. I don't like it very much, so I'm very sympathetic. Let's see what Harry wants to do. How are you going to cut the size of government? How is that any different from what Dole or Clinton want to do? They talk about reducing government size too.
Oh, well, they talk about government being too big with one hand, and with the other hand they tell you about all the new government programs that are going to make your life better. But what they don't realize is what the American people do realize, and that is that government doesn't work. It doesn't deliver the mail on time, it doesn't educate our children properly, it doesn't keep the cities safe, and what we need is not to reform government, not to find better government programs, not to find somebody who can better manage big government, but to reduce it to the absolute minimum possible.
Whoa, what would that be? What is the minimum possible?
Well, the Constitution of the United States says the federal government should be involved with national defense, the judiciary, and a few other functions. It says nothing about getting the government into welfare, education, housing, transportation, all of these areas that it's moved into over the last 30 to 60 years and made such an unholy mess of.
So basically you're very much in tune with the Founding Fathers, the people who wrote the Constitution. They thought about it a lot. They said federal government should not be involved in these things, and it is.
Right, and it spelled it out in the Constitution, and the 9th and 10th Amendments said nothing that isn't authorized in the Constitution is the province of the federal government. And one thing they didn't want was an income tax. They didn't want any direct contact between you and the tax collector. And as a result of that, for 130 years, we got along just fine in this country without an income tax. But once we had that, then it was easy to create a welfare state because financing was unlimited. How are we ever going to get back to where we once were before? How are we ever going to disentangle people from all of these government programs that they've become dependent upon? Well, I think there is a very simple way.
All right.
And that is to tie everything up together. And I'm asking the American people, would you give up your favorite federal programs? I don't care whether that's a farm subsidy, a student loan, or maybe you just love the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but would you give up your favorite federal programs if it meant you never had to pay income tax again? Because that's the price of it. That's what you're paying in order to have those programs that you like.
In other words, everybody's got something that he says, oh, I couldn't give up this, I couldn't give up that. But the question is, would you say, wait a minute, yeah, I could give up that one thing that I really like. If you're a farmer and you say, well, I don't know if I could make it without farm subsidies. But in fact, if they said, all right, I'll give up farm subsidies, if you give up this, if everyone gave up his favorite program.
Yes, we have to do it all at once, and we have to repeal the income tax. And when I say repeal the income tax, I mean repeal it and replace it with nothing. No flat tax, no sales tax, but just finance government with only the revenues coming in now from tariffs and excise taxes, which are enough for national defense, the judiciary.
See, now that's going to be a hard thing to get. Folks, are you out there hearing what Harry's saying? He's saying no income tax, not a flat tax. You know, don't replace one with the other.
You know what, we're going to do that one over again because we just ran out of things. But it was really nice. It always happens